not a particularly nice day today, so what I thought I'd do is try and find some shelter in the woods. And while I was doing that, we could have a chat about gear. More specifically, what I look for in a camera for landscape photography. Now before we start, I feel I should point out that I am a landscape photographer. I don't do portraits, I don't do wildlife, and I don't do sports. So my requirements are very much geared towards landscape photography. I shoot with this. It's a Canon EOS 6D, which I bought back in September 2015 for about £1,600. I'm now going to spend a little bit of time explaining why I bought the 6D, what was important to me and what wasn't, and if I were buying a camera today, what would I go for? If you're like me and maybe you favour a more simple composition, perhaps woodland isn't the best place to come. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about brand. Now, I am a Canon man. When I say I want to buy a new camera, what I really mean is I want to buy a new Canon. Now, I'm not about to recommend that you buy a Canon. Brand affiliation is a very complex thing influenced by a number of factors. But I will say this. Of the 20 YouTube photographers that I watch regularly, 50% use Canon, 35% use Nikon, leaving just 15% for all of the other brands.
Give me love, give me all your love, oh, 'cause I want you. No one else makes me feel this way, don't know what you do.
Now, if you are thinking about buying a new camera, the first thing you should consider is the system. So here we've got two options. You can either go for a DSLR like my Canon 6D, or you can go for a mirrorless camera. Now, as far as mirrorless is concerned, the main advantage for a landscape photographer is weight. So my 6D with the 24 to 70mm lens is almost a kilo heavier than the Canon M6 and its equivalent lens. Next time you're hiking up a hill, ask yourself this: do you want to carry an extra kilo? Now, I think it's fair to say that as far as mirrorless is concerned, both Canon and Nikon are lagging well behind the competition. So if it's mirrorless you're thinking of, you probably want to look at either Fuji, Sony, or even Panasonic. But I think it's also fair to say that mirrorless is probably the only area where Canon is actually beating Nikon at the moment. Go Canon.
Hold my hand, could you hold my hand, look me in the eyes. You and me, yeah, that's all I need, and I'll be alright.
Alright Canon lovers, I take it all back. Canon have actually got quite a lot going for them at the moment. They've got a fabulous autofocus system, a really good selection of lenses. And if you want to buy a full frame camera, there's nothing cheaper on the market at the moment than the Canon 6D Mark II. And that segues nicely into us talking about sensors.
I'll be right here, I swear that I'll stay here with you.
Now, you've probably noticed that the route I'm taking today is a circular route, and I spotted this composition on my first time round. I kind of like the way that the path leads up to that tree in the distance. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about sensors. Again, here you've got two options. You can either go full frame, like my 6D, or you can go for a crop sensor. Now, it used to be the case that you got a better image from a full frame camera, but I don't think that's true anymore. The main disadvantage of a crop sensor is it lengthens the focal length of your lenses. Now, when I bought this 6D, I made a decision to invest in Canon L series lenses, particularly this 24 to 70mm lens that I'm using now, which is my favourite lens for landscape photography. Now, if you put this lens on a Canon 80D with its crop sensor, that will increase the focal length to somewhere in the region of 38 to 112mm, which is far too long for my style of photography. The whole crop sensor versus full frame is a bit of a can of worms, and the next can of worms is resolution. When I started photography about 12 or 13 years ago, the manufacturers were locked in megapixel war. And it was all, our camera's got 20 squillion megapixels, our camera's got 22 squillion megapixels. And as far as I was concerned, it didn't make a blind bit of difference because I never printed my images. If all you do is share your images online on something like Instagram, you don't actually need much more than about 2 megapixels. Now, my 6D has 20 megapixels, and that allows me to produce prints up to about 18 inches wide. The Canon 5 DSR used by David Dixon has 50 megapixels, and that allows him to produce prints up to about 28 inches wide. The other advantage of high-resolution cameras is the scope for cropping. So David can crop about 35% of his image out and still produce prints to rival anything my 6D is capable of.
I swear that I'll stay here with you. Hold me closer. I wanna stay here with you. All that we have is each other now. I promise I won't leave your side.
I've just taken a shot of the scene behind me. I like the way that the path draws the eye off into the distance and how the dark trees on either side are very foreboding. And that brings me neatly onto the subject of dynamic range. A camera's dynamic range refers to the range of tones that a camera is capable of capturing. Essentially, a camera with a higher dynamic range can capture more detail in the highlight and shadow areas. My Canon 6D has a dynamic range of about 12 stops, and that was the most of any Canon camera at the time it was released. Now, the Nikon D850 used by Julian Baird has almost 15 stops of dynamic range. And that 3-stop difference means that Julian has to use ND grads a lot less often than I do.
If you're giving me your love, giving me your love.
Now, there's a fair bit of rain about at the moment, and Canon say that my 6D is likely weather sealed, which I think is Canon speak for don't take your camera out in the rain. So I packed mine away so it's nice and safe and sound. The weather sealing on high-end professional cameras like David's 5DSR and Julian's D850 is much better, so they can be a bit more confident when it's absolutely lashing it down.
All that we have is each other now. Promise you won't leave my side.
As a landscape photographer, there are a few things that I'm not interested in at all. That Canon 6D has a fantastic ISO range, but as I shoot at ISO 100 most of the time, it had absolutely no bearing on me buying one at all. One of the biggest criticisms of the 6D is its lack of autofocus points, but as I focus manually for 99% of my shots, that didn't bother me either. The same can be said for frame rate. That 6D shoots at 4.5 frames a second, but as I rarely take more than 2 or 3 frames a minute, for me, that was an irrelevance. That being said, there are a few things that I wish my 6D did have. I use the LCD on the back of the camera a lot for framing compositions, focusing and checking my exposure. At 6'5", I am quite tall, and so I spend a lot of time hunched over my camera. So an articulated screen would be very, very useful indeed. I also like to focus manually, and so focus peaking would be really helpful to see what's in focus and what isn't.
I hope who I am is enough for you. If I'm giving you my love, giving you my love.
Final shot of the day. Got the path leading round to the left-hand side over the bridge, and then on the right-hand side we've got a bench. Now all this scene needs is for somebody to go and sit on that bench, but I am trying to cut down on the selfies. So what about now? If I were in the market for a new camera today, how would I spend my 1,600 quid budget? Well, the Pentax K1 with its 36 megapixels and 14.5 stops of dynamic range certainly looks good on paper. but that thing weighs an absolute ton, and there's a limited selection of lenses available. Pentax do offer a 24 to 70mm lens, but it's f2.8 and £1,100 more expensive than the lens I already use. So that only really leaves the Canon 6D Mark II, and I'm afraid Canon, there simply isn't enough difference between that and its predecessor to persuade me to upgrade. So if I were in the market for a camera today, I'd jump onto Amazon and snap up one of the remaining 6Ds and save myself 650 quid in the process. So that's what I look for in a camera, but what about you? Why not leave me a comment and let me know what camera you use, and more importantly, why? I've left links for all of the cameras that I've talked about today in the description below, so you can check those out. Thanks ever so much for watching, look after yourself, and I'll see you next week.